Hey, everybody, this is the progress report for this Wednesday. And can you believe it's actually January 31st? We've had the big moon thing last night.
That's right.
And, you know, people said now I can verify it that when you get older, time goes faster, except for the month of January. Seems to last forever, doesn't it? And I regret to say that this is the progress report, which we always look forward to having my good friend Mike Farley sitting next to me. Mike is under the weather. Mike, I hope it's not the flu because we've had too much of that. But we expect you back, not next week, because next week I'll be here with Lou D'Alessandro and I believe Paul LeBlanc, the president of SNU, Southern New Hampshire University, which has become now the largest employer in the city of Manchester. And that's going to we'll be talking about next week. That's a good tease, folks. You ought to be back for that. That should be a good one. But here we are in the last day of January 2018, and I could not be more pleased than to welcome back one of my favorite people in the world and one of my favorite people to be on this program, the incomparable Arnie Arnesen, Deborah Arnie Arnesen, and she's here. Wow. Arnie, thank you so much for coming in and joining us.
I have to tune in next week. I want to hear Paul LeBlanc.
It should be good.
I taught for a while at Southern New Hampshire University.
Really?
Yep, and we had students that, remember my show, Political Chowder, that TV show?
I do remember
that. That show was actually produced by students at Southern New Hampshire University, so it was really very exciting. Ask Paul. He started at one of the tiniest colleges in the country. I think it was Marlborough College.
Up in Vermont.
Up in Vermont. I think it was Marlborough. I mean, it's the size of a postage stamp. And now when you look at what a behemoth SNHU is, no, I mean,
it's not stopping. It's going on. You drive up
the number of
93
buildings.
and there's buildings, and there's, road closings because they're adding on
But you have to compliment him because his buildings are beautiful. They do a lot of public art. Mm-hmm. So it isn't just, I mean, they've made a beautiful facade. In a lot of ways, you almost wish it could be a role model for a lot of cities because what they've done is interesting architecture and beautiful public art. So, but I would love to understand what he sees as his arc of history from Marlborough to SNHU.
Well, we will definitely bring that into the conversation with Lou D'Alessandro next week. But this week we are going on with mostly national and state issues, folks. If you want city issues, we'll get to that. But this week we're going to talk mostly about national and state issues. One of the things that we've done with Mike Farley, one of the great things he's brought to this program is his thing he does every Wednesday night when he's here, which is usually 3 or 4 of the weeks in the month, except for the first Wednesday, is the POTUS report or the progress report. Well, we're going to do a lot of POTUS report and the progress report today because last night, I don't know how many of you could endure this. I had to wait until this afternoon to, get myself ginned up to do this and actually listen to this pretty much hour and a half State of the Union speech. That's SOTUS, SUTU, State of the Union message, which is in the Constitution. Every president's done it since George Washington. By the way, most of them haven't delivered a speech at the...
A letter.
It was a letter.
It was a letter.
It was a letter. Washington's letter was the first one, but it is in the Constitution. The president's supposed to report on the State of the Union. You'll be shocked to learn that almost every one of them says, under my watch, the State of the Union is good, great, strong. And Trump did the same thing. But this program last night, I don't know how many watched it. I did not. I forced myself to watch it this afternoon. But we want to talk about that because this is the POTUS report and the progress report without Mike Farley, but with the invincible, feisty, and passionate Arnie Arnesen.
It was, I think, the third longest State of the Union address.
Really?
Long in time, not long in words.
Oh yeah.
He was very slow and methodical, and I watched it, and I don't like what's the guy's name on MSNBC? Chris Matthews. I don't like him.
Oh yeah.
But Chris Matthews, I think, nailed it. And here's what he said about Donald Trump's speech. So Donald Trump has a base of about 34%. Okay, that's his base.
Yeah,
they will follow him. They will follow him off a cliff. They will follow him anywhere. In a way, he's become a cult figure for that 34%. But there was a group of people between that 34% and about 48% that voted for Donald Trump. and have become somewhat disillusioned with him. And that speech last night was designed for them. It wasn't designed for the 34%. It wasn't designed for the rest of the country. It wasn't about bringing us together as a nation. But it really kind of looked at them and said, see, I can be measured. See, I can stay on script. See, let's talk about all the things that you care about. And if you look at really how he delivered that and really what his message was, it really to a large extent was about them. He talked about something that I thought was very interesting. I had a professor from Vanderbilt University on with my radio show today. And I said to her, what did he say about education? You know what he said?
Nothing.
No, that's not true. Anyone remember what he said? He mentioned vocational education.
Oh, yes.
Now, let me just tell everyone, they haven't used that term in probably 25 years.
This goes back to when we talked about junior colleges.
Exactly. Well, vocational education. And part of the rationale was, remember I told you that 15% he was talking to? Well, it's probably in the sort of the middle part of America, the southern part of America, an older white population where they're going, yeah, what happened to vocational education? We should be bringing back vocational education. Well, they actually have brought it back, but they don't call it that anymore. It's a lot more sophisticated than vocational education. Talk to a lot of high schools and employers and, two-year colleges, and you learn that they really are beginning to sort of focus on technology and whatever. But it was so interesting. Even his language was really refined down to exactly that sort of 15%. And he was horrific when it came to immigration. I mean, he didn't call them rapists, but he called them murderers instead.
Yes, he did.
That's what he did. He called them murderers.
He's
actually gone beyond the rapists. Now they kill.
He reached out to somebody whose family had been killed by some people who were immigrants.
Right.
And made that the poster child for why we have to deal with
the family migration, which he calls chain migration.
Migration.
I know that. Well, that's the reason he uses that word is that if you use the word family, you sound evil that you're getting rid of it. But if you use the word chain, it's kind of like chain link fence. It's all part of that theme.
Or you're carried off in chains.
Yeah, you're carried off in chains. And the other thing that I also thought was so interesting is that he made all the entire immigration population, except for DACA, as evil and murderers and rapists and don't have a good work ethic and drain the system.
And murder people.
And murder people. But I think he was trying to do this contrast. But the DACA, they're okay. They've been vetted. We know. We've followed them for months and years now, and we know that they're they may be dark, but they're good kids, I mean, and that's really what I thought he was doing.
When I was watching this, and he talked about 1.8 million people, DACA, these children that are brought here by no choice of their own, but by, people that brought them here. He was talking about them. I did not notice the enthusiasm in the Republican ranks with that part of his speech at all.
Absolutely. Well, but that's why he had to give them the red meat first. That's why he had to make all the other immigrants murderers, so that when he got to DACA, it was kind of like. And the other thing that I also think is interesting, and I want people to think about this. So he wants to get rid of this sort of family immigration policy, or at least limit it to basically a spouse and a younger, an under 18 child. That's the limitation of who you can bring in.
Isn't that pretty much the law now?
No. It's a little more expensive. You can bring a parent in.
You can bring your parents in.
Wait. But wait a second. But if that's what he was doing, he said, if I'm going to let these 1.8 million DACA kids in, they'll never bring their parents in. That's what this is about.
Yeah.
So look what he's doing to the DACA kids. He's giving them something that may offend his base by saying, I'll give you access to citizenship, but your parents, we'll make sure they never step foot here.
Never step foot.
I mean, it's that kind of evil parsing of human lives that is just so outrageous.
Yeah.
So outrageous. Yeah.
So, folks, I just want to remind everybody that this is a live show. It will re-air several times, I think 5 times in the next week. But this is a live show, and we welcome and urge people to participate by being call-ins at 640-3091. And if you want to be you want to challenge us, we don't mind that.
Oh, please, I invite it.
We invite it. We're welcome. We're ready for challenge. And if you want to, you had a different impression of the SOTU, the State of the Union, we'd love to hear about it. So I just put that out there. let's see, what we should go to
Well,
next year.
and let me just say one other thing, too, because I've been thinking a lot about this. Remember when he gave his first speech when he got elected, and it was so dark and so angry, and the country he was
Talking about his
describing.
inaugural
This is
address?
an inaugural address. I mean, the country he was
When this
describing.
carnage has to stop now?
Right. I didn't recognize who or what country he was talking about. And I suddenly realized that in a way, this was the bookend speech. This was designed to be, look what I have done over a year. We were in carnage, and our economy was in shambles, and everybody was afraid. And now, a year later, look at the magic. Because the country he described when he got inaugurated didn't exist. It never did. People were shocked at his language and the way he was describing America. And that, I almost wish we could have a split screen so you could see the two of them together. And it was done intentionally to make it look much worse than anyone could have ever possibly imagined, so that he could look like the savior. Within less than a year, he had accomplished so much. We are almost on the verge of nirvana, because billionaires and corporations now are going to be so incredibly rich. And of course, you're going to see it trickle down to you.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the part that absolutely is sort of mind-blowing. But I want people to look at the two of them together, because the first one wasn't true, and neither was the second. But they're good theater. They're just brilliant theater. Oh,
Okay.
it's so funny.
Well, I'm interested to hear what you out there think about what you heard, if you were able to endure this speech. I could not watch it last night. I just could not, but I forced myself to watch it on a,
We're keeping Gitmo open. There are
Keeping
44
Gitmo.
people. They actually got a standing ovation for keeping Gitmo open. Where did
How
that
about
come
that?
from?
How about
that was
that?
just, I mean, it was shocking. And one more thing before we sort of, he brought a group of interesting people in as sort of part of this political theater that were up with Melania. And I want to comment about one thing that was very emotional, but also raises a lot of questions. Remember when he introduced the cop, his wife,
From
and
Albuquerque.
and this little baby.
There was a little baby.
And there was a little baby. And the
and
story.
it was charming, and it was touching.
It was very, well, but so let's get the backstory here. The cop came across an addict who was about to shoot up. And he basically...
about to give birth.
About to give birth as well. And he basically said to her, let me adopt your fetus. You know, and we don't know all the details of the story, but basically this was a woman who obviously had hit rock bottom. And this guy who is in a position of power, that's what a cop is. He's in a position of power.
Absolutely.
And she's shooting up, which is illegal. So he comes in and says, we don't know the details, but it felt a little bit like, let's make a deal. I will adopt this baby, which is a lovely gesture, but it's also, and what bothered me about last night was there was no mention of the birth mother. The whole rationale for this is that we have an opioid crisis in this country, everyone. And the only way he would talk about it was about this lovely fairy tale about this baby that was rescued, but it doesn't tell you about what we're really facing as a society in this country, and the real disaster of the opioid crisis, which is the woman they never talked about. She was disposable.
She just disappeared from the scene as soon as the baby was adopted.
Exactly, because she's only
gone.
a vessel. She's a vessel for the pregnancy, but she's not a human being that we need to care about. And instead of using this as an opportunity to say, I'm glad that you were there, but we need to talk about why you needed to be there. Never once was there the connection to the real problem. And the real problem is addiction. And the real problem is that woman. And the real problem is all the other mothers. And I've been saying over and over again, you need to start talking to elementary school teachers around the state and ask them in first and second and third grade about the challenges they are now facing that they have never faced before. The number of children that are now coming in who are being raised by grandparents, not being raised by parents, who've been raised in homes where addiction was the norm. They are coming in with so many incredible issues. And instead of the state of New Hampshire trying to figure out how to assist these elementary schools, they're talking about passing a voucher bill that will drain dollars out of our public education system, which will make it even more complicated at a time where we have a greater tragedy in our public school system. I mean, we are so not thinking about what we have to face as a society. I mean, this voucher bill is immoral, but on top of what public schools are facing, it makes it so much worse.
Yeah.
Because there's so much more vulnerability now in these schools. Oh my God.
Arnie, is there any information out there about what became of this poor addicted mother who gave up her child?
So there was an article written, I recommend it everyone. There's an article written at slate.com that did a little bit of the backstory and asked a series of questions that were sort of raised by this prop that was used last night by Donald Trump. And she raised a lot of really important questions because, again, and what you didn't know is, you know what the cop and his wife have done? They've created a GoFundMe site for the mother. That was never mentioned last night. Again, she's disposable when it comes to Donald Trump and the Republican Party. She was the vessel. She's gone now. We got the baby. You're out of here. We don't care. There was a lot of that story.
That's the point.
That's the point. And I think if you look at the Slate.com article, it raises lots of questions about what has happened to us as a society. That it says that our social services aren't providing the adequate response. It says we're not treating addiction in the way that we should. It says that a cop who's in a position of power is saying basically, I'll take your fetus. Well, you know, that's fine, but maybe not. That may not be the answer. You know, so you really should read the article. It's a very powerful, powerful story, and it raises lots of questions.
And you know, one of the things that occurred to me as I was listening to Trump talk, he finally got around to the opioid crisis. And, you know, he did infamously call New Hampshire a drug-infested den about a year ago. And he got around to it, and his answer was tougher law enforcement.
No. So let me just tell everyone something that's so interesting. Remember when he appointed Chris Christie to come up to be his sort of czar on this crisis? And Chris Christie actually took this incredibly seriously. And we knew that he would because we actually saw him in New Hampshire, I think it was, when someone was asking him a question about the opioid crisis. And he brought in all these experts, and they came up with, I think, a list of 35 or 40 things that should be done, okay, in order to address it. Well, Chris Christie is yesterday's story, and everything on that list was basically ignored. And, well, but the list was solid, all right? Then I believe it was the Governors Association also came together because this is a problem for all of them. And they came up with a list of, I think, 45 or 50 things that should be done. So Donald Trump declares that we have a health crisis in America, the opioid addiction.
Yeah, he declared a national emergency.
Right. National emergency. That was like 60 days ago. It was just renewed. They had a list of 61 things that need to be accomplished in order for us to begin to address this opioid crisis. So ask me, everyone, what have they done in the first 60 days since he announced it on TV and owned this problem? One thing. They have done one out of 61.
That's one more than I was expecting.
All right, just one. And now they've renewed it again. And one of the things I learned from a guy who runs an organization called Shatterproof, and everyone, Shatterproof is an organization that really deals with the whole addiction problem and with families with addiction. And this is a father who was fairly well off, who lost his son to addiction. And what was amazing was he had money, something that a lot of people who have addicted kids don't have. So he was able to try everything. He tried every program, and when his son finally committed suicide, what he suddenly realized was that there was no standard for how you treat this addiction. Everybody had a different idea. Everybody tried this. Some had drugs, said don't use drugs to get them off. There was nobody had actually vetted what works and what doesn't work. So he started working with a professor from Harvard, and they came up with really sort of almost like an IEP for the opioid crisis of how to deal with this that virtually no program in this country is doing. Not one. And they know what they think will really work. And he said that was what was so frightening, was to suddenly realize what ultimately might be the treatment. And there isn't one specific way. There's like 3 variations on a theme. And they found out that virtually 90% of the treatments that are being offered in this country don't do it. Junk.
Well, folks, we're going to take a quick break because we do that on this progress report.
Unbelievable.
We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to be back to talk more about the State of the Union address and its shortcomings, which were many in my opinion. And we'll talk about other things too. Some things are happening at the state level
Please.
that I want to address, and we're very pleased to have Arnie Arnesen here with us. Well-informed, passionate, and feisty, as I like to say. And we'll be right back. Please join us calling at 640-3091 if you'd like to participate, and we'd like to welcome you. We'll be right back. Hey, this is the Progress Report. Welcome, Manchester, Hooksett, and Auburn to the Progress Report. Believe it or not, this is the end of January 2018.
He's marveling at the date.
Well, I am, because, as they say, as you get older, which is certainly my case, time speeds up, but it doesn't speed up in January very much. It was different when I was an avid skier, but I should probably try that again. Maybe it would change my attitude. But we are ending the month with one of my favorite people in the world and one of our favorite occasional guests and occasional co-hosts, Arnie Arnesen, who's come down to join us from Concord. And we've been talking about the State of the Union address by our president, Mr. Donald J. Trump, last night. And we hope you'll participate, 640-3091. But I wanted to go on to some other parts of this this address, and I think you did too. Didn't you have something?
Yeah. So on Monday I do a show called Rethink the Week, and I bring in usually a bunch of college professors to sort of talk about what's happening in politics in America, and we were talking about the fact that Congressman Kennedy, was chosen by Nancy Pelosi to do the response to Donald Trump, and I was depressed.
Really?
I was so shocked. And part of the reason is that Donald Trump thinks he's a king. And I'm looking at the Kennedys as kind of Camelot, and there's the prince. And I'm kind of going, what are we doing? What are we doing? It's almost like we're out of new ideas. And that, look, Joe did a nice job. He's a nice kid. It was almost scary to watch him because, I saw Jack and I saw Ted, and I mean, it's like the face is so familiar to those of us that were raised in that era. It was almost
I remember that
uncomfortable.
Era. It's pretty ambivalent now, but at the time it seemed magical.
Oh, it did seem magical.
And who would you have picked?
A mayor. I would have picked a mayor.
Really?
And the reason I would have picked a mayor is that in the end, that's where the buck stops.
Yeah.
Because if you see, the mayors refuse to meet with Trump and Pence. They're so angry at him because of what they're doing. This idea of the sanctuary city, this idea of what they're doing. They are making their cities unsafe as they are trying to make their city safe.
Yeah.
So I mean, and the mayors are facing the infrastructure problem. They're facing the water problem.
Yeah.
They're facing. Talk to people in Houston. You know, rebuilding Houston after Harvey, that is a mayor.
Yeah.
You know, talk to Flint, that is a mayor. Talk to Chicago. I would have found a mayor. Look at the amazing thing that Mitch Landrieu did about the Confederate statues. You know,
That
and the
was
whole
amazing.
idea. That was amazing. He's the mayor of New Orleans, everyone. I would have gone to a mayor because I actually think that, and the other reason I like the idea of a mayor as opposed to, you know, Joe Kennedy, a nice sweetheart of a guy, is that mayors are a lot like presidents. And what do I mean? They're one of one. All right?
Yeah,
They're not
exactly.
surrounded by 99 senators or 400 or plus
Yep.
members of Congress, that they have to make decisions. They can't hide under their desks. They can't blame the majority or the minority. They are stuck in that decision-making mode. And I just think that, again, Nancy's got to go. She doesn't even understand what's happening
I
in
agree
our
with you,
country.
absolutely.
She's got to go.
I think she's a
She
wonderful
doesn't-
person.
yes.
She served us nobly, but I think her time should be up. I think it's time for her to
Absolutely.
go.
So I thought the one thing I did kind of think as I watched Joe and I watched Bernie. I don't know if you guys watched it. You know, and Bernie was his typical, he did the math and he was talking about what happened with corporations, and he gave this amazing statistic that in 2017, the average worker in America saw a raise of 4 cents an hour. That's $1.68 a week. You can't even go to Burger King. I'm just
Can't even
and
get a
they
cup
took
of coffee.
No. And they take FICA out of that. So remember, of that 4 cents, you still have to pay a FICA tax. So and so he was doing the economic math and translating what really happened to you, and about the number of companies that actually shut their doors, and about Carrier that sent more jobs back to Mexico. You know, all these. So he so he was sort of the practical sort of economics message, and then Joe was the hope message.
Mm-hmm.
And in the end, that I think is the message of the party. It is both. You can't talk the economics without making sure that you understand that there's got to be hope there.
Yeah.
And Joe played the safe hope card because the hope card is safe. You know, he can talk about immigration, he can talk about transgender, he can talk about gay issues, he can talk about those kinds of things, and healthcare. Those are really hopeful messages. The economic message is also a hopeful message because if you look at the world economy is doing phenomenally well. I mean, trust me.
Most countries are doing better than we are.
Exactly,
actually.
and nobody wants to know that, okay? I mean, we have to face that reality. So I think that those two messages together, in some ways, I almost wish they were in the room together, because I think it would have been more powerful. But once again, they went to what was safe, and Joe Kennedy is safe, but he may be a rising star. In some ways, I hope not. I hope he is a great congressman, and that's it.
Yeah.
A little bit like Teddy. You know, be a good congressman and don't have any of those other dreams. Your family was yesterday's story. We don't need any more dynasties.
I absolutely agree.
And I mean, that's my problem with the Sununu's.
Yeah.
The Sununu's are a dynasty.
Yeah.
That is a problem, I think, for us. And then last but not least, there is one other thing that I don't know if you focused on. But obviously, Donald Trump did not talk about Russia.
He mentioned it once,
In what way?
but not in anything to do with meddling in the election. He mentioned it once to say they were an adversary along with China.
All right. But
That was it.
But what do we know he wants to do? He wants to get rid of Mueller. All right? We know that. We know that. And how does he begin to build the case? Well, one of the ways he begins to build the case is that his henchman in Congress, a guy by the name of Nunes, has cherry-picked a 4-page memo that he wants to release that the Department of Justice and the FBI said, you can't release this. First of all, it's inaccurate. You know, it doesn't give a complete picture, and the picture you're painting is it's harmful, and it's not about justice, it's not about accuracy, it doesn't tell the picture. It does, however, do what Donald Trump wants, which is to build the case to get rid of Rosenstein and then eventually to get rid of Mueller.
I believe that's his intent.
And what's
Without
worse,
any doubt.
But what's worse about that is that while he didn't mention this, he did kind of. Remember when he said this? He talked about the fact that all the people that he has brought in to the executive branch, that you want to reward really good workers within the federal bureaucracy, but you want to empower his administrative appointees to be able to get rid of the people that aren't doing a good job. They need to be let go. We need, I mean, I think he mentioned 1,000 that they got rid of with the VA.
Yep.
Now, that was a terrifying message, because what he was really talking about was legitimizing a Trump purge.
You're fired.
Right. No, exactly right. You see, here's the problem, everyone. He doesn't see the federal workers as civil servants. He sees them as Trump servants. And if
if they're not, they're gone.
They're gone. And that's what he said last night. And it wasn't a throwaway line. It was designed to build the case, not just for removing Mueller, but for making sure that there is a legitimate purge of scientists. Okay, think about what the EPA is doing. Think of what the Department of Energy is doing. I mean, a lot of these things, sometimes people say, oh, they didn't fire them, they just left in their own. There's an expression in law. It's called a constructive firing. If you create a situation that is so intolerable, that basically says you are a scientist, but not only am I not going to allow you to work on your science, but I'm going to have you answer phones at the office. Yeah, you're still employed, but you were hired to be a scientist, and now you're being, you're doing the phone messaging.
Yeah.
That's a constructive firing.
You can only put up with so much demeaning.
Exactly,
and you
exactly. And that is really what he tried to legitimize last night, is he was sending a message out that if you don't move lockstep with me, my people have orders, you are gone.
Yep.
That's chilling.
So here's some of the things that I noticed in reviewing this speech. It was what he did not say. Mm-hmm. He did not mention
He
did not mention the environment,
right,
and what his EPA is doing to dismantle our environmental protections.
Well, he did. He mentioned clean coal.
Oh, clean coal. There's the ultimate oxymoron, isn't it?
Right, exactly.
There's no such thing as clean coal, folks. Coal kills people from the day they're in the mines getting black lung disease to the day they put it in a power plant and we burn it and people die of, lung diseases. Clean coal is an oxymoron. There is no such thing as clean coal.
And there's no future for coal.
And there's no future for coal.
That's the part where he's evil.
Yeah.
Where he's evil isn't about calling it whatever he wants to call
Yeah.
it. He could call it perfect coal. He could call it diamond coal. I don't care what he calls it. But he is creating the misimpression for really hungry, depressed miners in Kentucky and in West Virginia that there is hope for the return of the coal industry. Let me just tell you, everyone, nobody is buying. Nobody is buying.
Not as long as natural gas is cheap.
Well, and it's not even about natural gas. Look at China. China used to be the conduit for so much of the coal. China can't buy it anymore. You know why?
They've canceled 100 coal plants.
They can't breathe the air.
Oh,
They can't breathe. My daughter wrote me a note yesterday, and she said, Mom,
lives in Shanghai,
she lives in
right?
Shanghai. She said it is getting worse and worse and worse, and they are desperately trying to fix it, and they know the only way they can do it is, in a way, we've given them a gift. We've now thrown a tariff on all solar panels imported from China, right?
Yeah.
Which is going to kill the solar, or at least do a lot of damage to the solar industry here. But in a way, China's not that upset about it, because the world is their oyster, because everybody else is on the uptick when it comes to buying solar.
Exactly.
So they have a bigger market than us. We are no longer
Yep.
important to them. And you can threaten, they're important to us for our solar industry, but we're not important to them.
I know I went to Beijing for my first and only visit several years ago when my son married a young lady from Hong Kong, and
Right.
their family took us to Beijing.
Right.
It was in November. We got out of the airport. We got out of the airplane, went to the airport, and I looked around, and everybody was wearing masks.
Yeah.
And there was this...
People think it's for germs.
It
It's because they can't
It was
breathe.
this horrible yellow haze. That,
Yeah.
it was late afternoon, but the sun couldn't even be seen.
Right.
It was appalling, just appalling. And during our time in Beijing and, going out to trek along the Great Wall, which is great fun, but there were people everywhere wearing these masks, and it was not because they were sick. It was because they did not want to breathe the air.
Right, right.
That's our major economic competitor in the world today.
Right.
They got enormous problems
Well, and the difference is that unlike Donald Trump, who's in climate change denial, and unlike Donald Trump, who wants to put a tariff and re-embrace coal, they do get what's happening.
They do.
And unfortunately, in a country like China,
and this is not a free market economy.
Right, exactly. In a country
this is
like
a state-directed economy.
That's right. They're not going to ask permission. They're just going to do.
They'll do it, and
They're
that's
gonna
what
do
they're
it.
doing.
Exactly. So what's happening with climate change in Concord?
Oh, well, we had a kind of an interesting day today. I don't know. We got kind of preempted because so many people were occupied with the issue of the transgender, ending transgender as a category for invidious discrimination against people.
Race, color, creed, religion, sexual
And
preference, sexual identity.
Yeah, sexual identity, transgender, and others.
Right.
And but we were there, and we had a press conference, and then we had an event, and it was about. And I'm quite excited about this, Arnie.
Okay.
We have a New England Governors Conference.
I do know.
The governors of New England all get together and they talk about, we've never had a New England legislative analog to that, where the legislatures of our region get together and talk about things we have in common. And we have a lot. Like Reggie, our regional greenhouse gas initiative.
Right.
That involves all the New England states and other states as well. And by the way, New Jersey just rejoined. Thanks to the new governor down there.
No surprise.
And that's
Chris
very
Christie
exciting.
was the aberration of the
He was the
moment.
aberration. The only one to ever
right.
pull a state out of Reggie, and the new governor has just put them back in.
Yep.
So we were there to talk about, along with other New England states, and New York, Maryland, Oregon, and Washington, what every state is doing to address.
And these were legislators coming in from all over?
All over.
Wow.
And it's the first time this has happened. And it was quite exciting, and there's a lot of exciting things going on.
Yeah.
The basic message is carbon is a pollutant.
Right.
It is causing people health problems.
Right.
It is causing us, it's going to cause us economic problems if we don't address it. And we need to address it. So every state in this group, 9 states, related on a national conference call what their legislative initiative is to address this.
That's exciting.
And it goes everywhere from Washington State, which is about to be, I think, the first American state to put a price on carbon.
Okay.
We have one jurisdiction in this continent called British Columbia,
Yep.
and they have done it.
Yep.
Washington will follow, thanks to the governor, Jay Inslee,
Yep.
strong environmentalists. And we have very exciting initiatives in Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New York, and Maryland,
Okay.
and Vermont. And these things are all happening, and we all talked about our state initiatives because we all know that Congress is pretty dysfunctional.
Well.
So this is very exciting. Whether we'll get our own bills through the New Hampshire legislature, our bills are only bills to study this issue.
Right.
And deal with carbon pricing, but it's coming.
Well,
it has to come.
It does have to come, and you elect governors every 2 years, everyone. So just remember that.
I think we're only one of 2 states that does that.
Yeah. Vermont and New Hampshire are the last 2 states that do it. The state before that was Rhode Island, and they changed, I think, in '91.
Yeah.
So, but let me just, I'm gonna disabuse you of getting together with other legislators. Back when I was a kid in the 1980s, I was one of the founders of an organization called the Northeast Network of Progressive Elected Officials.
No, I didn't know about that.
Yes, and about myself, Miles Rappaport.
Its time has come again.
Its time has come again. Myself, Miles Rappaport from the state of Connecticut, and a group of others, we got together on a fairly regular basis just to talk about what we were doing and what was successful and what were the pitfalls. And it was really wonderful. I mean, sometimes you feel kind of isolated when you're sort of by yourself thinking, am I dreaming something that's not realistic? And then you find out, oh no, they passed that in Connecticut 3 years ago. I'm like, oh, thank God.
It's very inspiriting.
It is. And I think that we have to look at the 2018 election in a very interesting way. And while it's been very rare that we don't re-elect a one-term governor, because it is every 2 years, and they're in constant election mode. And what I think is so interesting is that Chris Sununu is changing before our eyes. I mean, he's now embraced rail. He embraced rail.
He's for rail.
Oh my God, I'm so excited.
I got to hand it to him. That's good.
That's right.
The facts can influence
what fact
him.
didn't he know beforehand?
I don't think so. You knew the fact that
I
this
think,
was really necessary.
yeah, exactly. I think, well, I think what he's trying to do
I think it was the fact that our offer to get Amazon to
was so embarrassing.
Yeah.
Without it.
Without rail,
I know,
they
without
wouldn't pay
it.
us any attention.
I know.
That was it.
It was, well, and here's the sad story. Big business is the driver of everything.
Yeah.
I mean, we think that we are really not a place that's controlled by Congress or governors. It's about big business. I'll give you a perfect example. You mentioned Amazon suddenly bringing Chris Sununu to the rail, idea, which makes me barf. But that's okay. Thank you, Amazon. But look what Amazon did just the other day. Wasn't it Amazon and Goldman Sachs and Hathaway got together to talk about creating a healthcare system themselves for their some million people that they employ, because they're so disgusted with Washington because that's not accomplishing anything. They realize that healthcare is the Pac-Man of their profits because it's going up and up and up and not really providing satisfaction for people. So there's not any kind of real benefit to what they're doing. All they know is they're spending more and more money. So these three very successful, very wealthy companies have decided. I mean, in fact, healthcare stocks tanked on Monday and Tuesday after this announcement. All it was an announcement that they were going to get together to try to figure out healthcare. And what I think is so interesting is that, and they said that profit wasn't going to be part of their model. It was going to be technologically based, and it was going to be outcomes based, and all this stuff. And I think what's fascinating is they've given up on Washington figuring out health care. Yeah. They know that states really don't have the capacity to do it, that they really need to have something that will sort of focus on it. And I think what their rationale is, they want to create a system for their 1.3 million employees, but then they'll say, yoo-hoo, you can buy in. Yoo-hoo, you can buy in. So other companies will start piggybacking. And it's an interesting way that they may drive an interesting single payer, but it will be because they created it, and therefore the Republicans can like it because it was driven by business. But I think the ultimate end result may be very similar to what a single payer looks like. It's just that it'll be their idea, not those commie pinko red Democrats.
Yeah. Which brings me back to Trump's State of the Union address, where he again bashed Obamacare as a failure and crowed about eliminating the individual mandate to drive people into requiring health care. My God, that's just disgusting.
Well,
that's just disgusting.
But
what do you expect?
He was born on the right side of the track.
He was.
He's never had to face want.
Yeah, he's never had to face want.
And that's. I mean, I've lost my health care 3 times in the course of my life.
Have you?
All right, 3 times.
You told me.
I told you once.
That was pretty dramatic.
But I remember my father. He just recently died. But my father is to the right of Attila the Hun, big Rush Limbaugh supporter. Had pictures of Newt Gingrich all over the house. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And I remember having a huge fight with my father about health care. And the reason I had a fight, my father was a public school teacher in New York City.
Really?
My father always had benefits. Always.
Yeah.
He worked as a public school teacher for 42 years. And so he never not had a benefit. He never not had a job. He lived off a government teat his entire life. And here was my father telling me how he didn't need to fix health care. And I remember giving him just a knuckle sandwich. And I said, Papa, your daughter has been without health care 3 times over the course of her lifetime.
The one was really scary.
I said, she wasn't on. She didn't have a pension. She didn't have a public health care system. She had what most Americans have, which is vulnerability.
Yeah.
I said, and most of us get pink slipped, and then we don't have a healthcare system, or we get pink slipped and we try to buy Cobra, and we can't afford Cobra because Cobra is more than our paycheck.
Right.
And I remember looking at my dad, going, "You were in such la la land." But my father, in the same way that Donald Trump is, doesn't know what it's like to be so afraid.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there you go. Paul, I think we'll take our next break right now if we can, and we'll be right back. I know we don't have a whole lot of time left, but we'll be back with a third segment of the Progress Report for this Wednesday, January 31st. I got some other interesting things to talk about, folks, and I'm sure Arnie does too. We'll be right back. Okay, everybody out there in Manchester, Auburn, Hooksett. This is the progress report for January 21st, the last Wednesday in the month, and we are pleased to have with us one of our favorite people and our favorite guest and occasional co-host, Arnie Arnesen. And I understand we have a caller, and I'm going to go to that caller right now. Hello? Eddie, you with us? Hi, Eddie.
Hey, Bob.
Hi, Eddie. Thanks for calling. Good to hear from you.
Hey.
Go right ahead.
My call. Hey, I got a quick question for Arnie.
Okay.
Yes,
You said your father was to the right of Attila the Hun?
yeah. I'm not sure
What
where
did you
Attila
mean
was.
by that?
My father was a very conservative Republican. My father,
Right, but
my father, when you walked into our house, there was a sign on the door that said English only. When you talked to my father about politics, his politics was basically informed by Rush and Fox. When you talked to my father about government or taxes or virtually anything, he stopped thinking after a while. And that's what scared me, because we couldn't have
it.
it
Attila
done.
the Hun, though.
Oh, stop. I know, I shouldn't defame Attila. Is that what you're telling me?
Well, how does Attila the Hun enter? I don't understand the
The expression?
analogy there. Attila the Hun was a murderer and a rapist and all that. What that mean? You know, I don't.
No, my father was none of those things. But my father was very uber conservative. I will regroup and say that instead. Will that make you happy?
Instead, what now?
I said I will regroup and just say he was uber conservative. Very conservative.
Okay.
All right. And we'll put Attila back in the history books. Okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
Thanks, Eddie.
What a nut.
You know, it's interesting. Attila the Hun gets wrapped with being the most right-wing thing in the history of the world.
I know.
He was basically a plunderer, swept across the steppes of Central Asia,
Right.
threatened a declining Roman Empire in the 4th century or 5th century, whenever it
Right.
was, and died before he could actually invade Rome, but that did not delay the collapse of the Roman Empire for long. That was Attila the Hun. There's a famous account of, one of the Roman envoys visiting his headquarters and what that was like. That's about all we know about Attila the Hun.
So what do you know about that? What happened when he visited his headquarters? Do you know any more details of that story?
It was frightening and impressive. That's all I know.
Frightening. Well, my father was, he would be in that frightening and impressive, I think, sort of range,
But I do think the analogy of saying Attila the Hun is the most right-wing person in the history of the world is a little bit overworked.
All right, well, but my father was very reactionary.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing that was really scary for me is Glenn Beck. He used to listen to Glenn Beck. And Glenn Beck was always saying that the world was coming to an end and that you needed to prepare, and would sell these products, these food products, that would basically last in your basement for 40 years.
Oh, yeah. Back in the days when we used to have your own home bomb shelter against the nuclear attack.
When my father died, we found hundreds of pounds of food that he had ordered from Glenn Beck. I mean, I'm like, oh, Dad, what have you done? So, between listening to people that said buy gold or buy food, my father was buying it. And what was also scary was that there were a lot of telemarketers that my father must have been on a list. And the other thing is, they shook him down all the time. And we found out that over the course of the last probably 6 or 7 years, he was literally being shaken down to the tune of $40,000, $50,000, and $60,000 a year. And they would call up and scream at him if he didn't donate as much as he had donated last month.
Really?
I mean,
How did you escape all this?
Well, oh God. Well, that's another story.
But
Isn't that that's the other part that makes me so unhappy, is not only was he getting old and his mind was atrophying and he wasn't thinking clearly, but that he was so vulnerable to these sort of very over-the-top groups that were calling him and literally shaking him down, from buying food that was totally unnecessary to basically writing checks that were unnecessary. And I was like, oh, and I remember at one point I called my brother up and I said, pull the plug on the phone, just do it, have it routed through your house. But that was sort of, and that's the vulnerability that I worry about.
I guess we got another incoming call. We're glad to have it.
call's gone.
Oh, okay, thank you. All right, thanks, Paul. I wanted to turn to one other subject. There was a issue that was a subject of a hearing yesterday in the House Judiciary Committee. And I think you'll be interested in this one, Arnie, too, although we didn't talk about it before we got on the air. And that's the issue of taxpayer standing.
Taxpayer standing, okay, for the purpose of suing.
For the purpose of suing.
Okay.
And this is an interesting one. In New Hampshire, since 1863, pretty generally, taxpayers have had the right to sue the state when they feel that the state or a municipality is doing things that are illegal or unconstitutional. And all they had to say is, I'm a taxpayer and I don't like my tax funds being used to do this, provide vouchers for private education or whatever.
Right.
This was never really seriously questioned until until we came up with this idea of the general court agreeing that some funds could be diverted from public education through vouchers to private schools, including religious schools.
Right.
And there was
we were going to create this sort of nonprofit so we could sort of launder the money through
the money, yeah.
And therefore, therefore you didn't technically touch the public tax dollars because it went through this laundered 501c3
exactly.
And then you could touch, and the money came out, even though you knew that dollar was actually the same as this dollar.
Yeah. Well, there's a very fine educational advocate who's on the Board of Education named Bill Duncan.
Yeah.
And he brought a lawsuit saying this is unconstitutional because New Hampshire has a much more stringent requirement than the federal Constitution about religion and not funding religious schools with public tax dollars. And he won a Superior Court decision and went to the Supreme Court, and they said, no, you can't sue about that because you don't have standing.
Who does?
And nobody has standing.
But that's what the court's decision ultimately said is. If he doesn't have standing, did the court suggest who does?
Nobody does. So we have an unusual alliance on this one, Arnie. You'll like this.
Oh, my God.
I'm allied with Chuck Douglas.
Oh, I like that.
The ACLU.
Oh, I love this.
And, oh, God, I don't know. But we have a number of people who all say, we believe in New Hampshire. We believe in government being close to the people.
Right.
We believe in people having lots of levers to influence government, whether it's town meeting or our 400-member legislature or all our elections. We believe in this, and we think that taxpayers should have standing to sue the government.
Wow.
And so we had the hearing before that and before the Judiciary Committee yesterday, and I think it went pretty well. But this is going to now take a constitutional amendment, which means we got to get through the House and the Senate by a 60% vote.
What was the vote in the Supreme Court?
I think it was unanimous.
That makes no sense.
I mean, it's really sick.
It's shocking. It's shocking.
It is absolutely shocking.
I want to go read that decision.
You should read that.
I want to read that decision.
Read the Duncan decision and check up on this. You should probably talk about this.
No, I will.
Because, one of the glories of New Hampshire, we believe government is close to the people.
Right.
People should have access to government. And I don't see any reason why people shouldn't have the right to sue if they think the government is behaving illegally.
Let me say something very positive about the idea of this sort of government close to the people. So my show airs in Texas, and I have a guy that comes on all the time from Houston. And we were talking about how the power of the speaker and the lieutenant governor, basically so that if a bill comes up, they can make a decision that bill will never see the light of day. That bill, sure, file it, not a problem. Call me in 30 years, you might see the bill. The lovely thing about New Hampshire is not only do we have 400 legislators, 424, but every bill filed by every single legislator,
crazy as it may be,
as crazy as it sounds, will get to the floor.
It'll get a hearing in committee, and it'll get a vote on the floor.
And that is again the idea and that's why I'm shocked by the court. Because that's actually following in the same logic about the taxpayer being able to sue. Mm-hmm. It's the same logic as every person, all 424 of them. If they have introduced a bill, they have a right to have that bill heard. Yep. That is unbelievable. I've got to read the decision because I'm so shocked because it is. Yep. It doesn't make sense.
You should get up on this. You would love it.
I will. I promise.
Folks, we're done. I'll be back next week with Lou D'Alessandro and I believe Paul LeBlanc, president of SNU University, one of the major institutions in our state now and a real force here in the city and the state. We'll be back next week. I want to thank Arnie for coming down from Concord to join me, which is always a terrific pleasure and great fun. And thanks to our callers. We'll be back next week with another edition of the Progress Report.